Chapter 171, Will Leave. After this day, there were rumors in the Hanlin Academy, saying that Zhang Boyu, the head of the household department, and Xie Wei, the young master of the crown prince, quarreled over a test answer sheet, as if the matter involved some ethical guidelines. The Zhang Shilang, who was kind to people by nature, almost blushed and even sneered at Xie Wei twice rather angrily, only saying something "How can this be reasonable? How can this be reasonable?" and walked away. No one wanted to go anywhere else. After all, how could a person like young Master Xie have a clear moon and a good character to have anything to do with any ethical guidelines? Said that after Zhang Boyu and Xie Wei had an unhappy conversation, a dark cloud was buried in his heart, and he vaguely felt that it was never a good thing for his daughter to be favored by such a high-ranking and powerful person. And Xie Wei's appearance changed so quickly before and after the event that he wondered if this person was the same person as Xie Juan he knew before. After thinking about it again, he came back that day and talked to Zhang Xuning. After Zhang Xuning woke up in the afternoon, she had already begun to tell the maid to re-inventory her existing things, and replied to Yu Fangyan, planning to leave for Shizhong this month. Zhang Boyu sent someone to invite her, but it was just right. In the study, Changzhou, who was waiting beside Zhang Boyu, brought the tea and withdrew. Only the father and daughter were left in the room. Zhang Boyu pondered for a while before he spoke. "Girl Ning, your sister's family affairs have now been settled, and the marriage will only be completed in 2 days. I see that you don't seem to like going out much ever since you came back from the palace. The son of a wealthy family in the capital, except for the son of Ding Fei who is really not very good, I don't know if you have any eye-catching? It's time for you to plan a thing or two at home." Sure enough, when she was old, the family began to worry about her marriage. Zhang Xuning picked up the tea, lowered her head and saw her eyes shaking in the cup and the sparkle under her eyes. The face that came to mind for the first time was cold and solemn, but it didn't bring her too much tenderness and sweetness, but there was a faint tingling. Her hand shook as she slowly put the teacup down. Zhang Boyu looked at her expression, and hurriedly said, "Father is not in a hurry to marry you to anyone. If you have a good time with that Ding Fei son, his drunken and cynical problems can be changed, and you really like it, it's not impossible." Zhang Xuning smiled. "Father is too worried, I don't like this person." Zhang Boyu breathed a sigh of relief, and said in his heart that if she likes Xiao Ding Fei, I'm afraid it's better to thank you. He continued, "Then you really have a crush?" "Naturally, there is. It's a pity that the person she likes doesn't seem to like her." Zhang Xuning felt that she shouldn't have answered this question, so she simply didn't answer it, and said bluntly, "Father, my daughter doesn't have the intention of talking about marriage now. All things in Beijing are troubled, and this month my daughter plans to go to Shizhong to relax." "Nonsense." Zhang Boyu was taken aback, his eyes widened, and he couldn't believe what he had heard. "How old are you in a girl's house? What kind of Shizhong are you going to on the high mountain road?" Zhang Xuning knew that things would not go so smoothly. After all, a girl who had not left the cabinet was going to go far away by herself, which sounded really incredible. Zhang Boyu reacted like this, and she was not surprised. But since she dared to mention this, she was naturally prepared. Only lightly continued, "Some time ago, there was a heated discussion in Beijing about Her Royal Highness the eldest princess and her relatives, and there was a daughter behind her. It was also her daughter's idea to propose that Xiao Shu should be reconciled with the princess." Zhang Boyu got up in shock. "What did you say?" He knocked over the teacup. Zhang Xunning's words were not finished, and added, "On the day of Her Royal Highness the princess and her relatives, the reason why I did not return for a long time was also because I was planning Li Daido's Wang, and I planned to intercept and kill the team halfway through. It's just that His Highness was unwilling, so he couldn't succeed." This time, Zhang Boyu was completely speechless. Any one of them, pulling it out is a big rebellion to kill the head. Zhang Boyu only thinks that his daughter likes to play a little and make trouble, but it is only limited to young people. Where did he think that she would have a hand in the recent wind and rain? When cognitive subversion, it is completely unresponsive. Zhang Xuning calmly analyzed the pros and cons for him. Xiao Shu is clear about this matter, and now she is a newly favored concubine in the palace, and she doesn't know how many ways to take revenge on me. If her daughter stays in the capital, she doesn't know how many ridiculous things she will do. Second, her words and deeds are inherent, and she is afraid that her sister who has become the concubine of the king of Linzi will be implicated. Third, if Xiao Shu stares at her daughter for revenge, she may not implicate the family. In this way, it is not to leave the capital for a period of time to avoid the disaster. The people in the capital have not seen their daughter for a long time, and they naturally gradually forget. I also heard that the people of Tianfu are outstanding people, and my daughter went to Shizhong to change her past mistakes, and naturally no one knows how domineering I am in Beijing, and I may not be able to find a good son-in-law for my father. I also asked my father to think about it. But in fact, Zhang Boyu agrees or disagrees, it doesn't hurt her. If you agree, the matter of traveling is naturally simple. If you don't agree, the worst is to run out secretly like Yu Fangyan in the previous life. As for the road to guide these things, Zhou Yunzi can handle it. What's more, compared to Yu Fangyan in the previous life, she still has more silver tails in her hands, and she is not embarrassed at all. For the first time, anger appeared in Zhang Boyu's heart. But as soon as Zhang Xuning said it, her anger subsided. It was not that I was persuaded by Zhang Xuning's far-fetched rhetoric, but I thought of Xie Wei. The second daughter has been living abroad for many years, and after returning to the capital, he did not raise it well, so he has a lot of debts. If she had no intention of Xie Wei, and Xie Wei wanted to take advantage of it, he should never sit idly by. But Xie Zhuan's ability is also clearer than others. If Zhang Xuning stays in the capital, the situation is not optimistic. It may not be impossible to go to Shizhong like this. Although the mountains are high and the road is far away, it is located in a remote area, but at least it avoids the disturbances in the capital, and it can also make Xie Wei out of reach, and the risk of falling into the notoriety of teacher-student disorder can naturally be dissipated. He frowned and thought for a long time, then finally sighed and asked, "Have you made up your mind?" Hearing this, Zhang Xuning knew that the matter had been done. She said firmly, "Not bad." Zhang Boyu said, "When I think about it, let's see what the situation is over there in Shudi. Even if you want to go, you have to make some arrangements at home." Zhang Xuning got up and saluted, "Thank you, father." Originally planned to listen to her daughter's talk about marriage for her, but it came to an abrupt end because Zhang Xuning suddenly proposed to leave the capital. Zhang Boyu opened the case to see the situation in Shudi. Zhang Xuning retired from the study and returned to her room. The maids moved all her valuables out, just because Zhang Xuning told her in the afternoon that she would go out recently, and some valuables were inconvenient to carry, so they had to take them out and pawn them. It's just that when she took out the green jade bracelet from her makeup, Tang Erlianer hesitated. They don't know where this bracelet came from, and it's not a particularly valuable thing, but it has always been put at the bottom of Zhang Xuning's makeup. And the reason why Wang Xing's family was attacked by a girl last year was because of this bracelet. The two of them muttered for a while, but they didn't dare to put the bracelet in the things they wanted to pawn, but put it alone in a small box and placed it on the table. So Zhang Xuning came back and saw it as soon as she raised her eyes. Lianer hurriedly came up and explained, "I saw it in the makeup just now, the slave and the maid and Tanger didn't dare to move. I want to ask you how to deal with it." Hishan green jade, the jade color is warm, the texture is smooth, like a cleansing water wave. Zhang Xuning picked it up and was a little stunned. Tang Erlianer didn't dare to speak. After a long while, Zhang Xuning suddenly asked, "When will Shenju get married?" Everyone called it His Royal Highness the King of Linzi, and when they heard the word Shenju at first glance, the two maids didn't react, but then they wiped a cold sweat for Zhang Xuaning's boldness, and replied, "Just this month, 18, there are no 2 days left. Is the girl going?" Zhang Xuaning put the jade bracelet back in the box. There seemed to be a bit of silence in his eyes, and he only said slowly, "It's still time to go and see." Chapter 172, Right and Wrong, Love and Hate. On the day of the wedding of Shenju, the king of Linzi, the capital was full of lights, from the palace to the palace to the palace to the streets along the road of the two concubines' mansions. All the obstacles were swept away, and red curtains were hung on the side of the road near the palace early road. All the civil and military officials attended the banquet. Even the emperor went, and Xie Wei, who had very little entertainment, also went to the mansion for a banquet, and those who had a foreign errand and could not be in person, the rich congratulatory gifts were naturally sent by the special trustees first. Fang Miao, who used to be in the many companions of Yang Zizai, was not very conspicuous, giving people a deeper impression of being an unprincipled wall grass, the wind blowing that way, which way people fall, but the reason why she fell back and forth was not a conflict of interests, it was entirely because of her hexagrams, so although others criticized her, it was not good to say anything. Now suddenly flew on the branch and was elected as the princess of Linzi. Others don't say it. Chen Chuyi, who went to choose with Fang Miao that day, was the first to be unhappy, not to mention that someone went to congratulate him in person, and he didn't even give half of the congratulatory gift. There was no such person in the capital, such a thing. Zhang Xuaning had a slight impression of the eldest princess of Liang because Fang Miao went to visit her with her when she was grounded that day, so she brought herself a gift 2 days in advance and saw it first. When Fang Miao saw her, her originally sad face suddenly smiled. First of all, he kept saying that the noble person was coming, and it was okay for me to have a family affair, and then asked Zhang Xuaning about Zhang Suiwai's behavior without concealment. Zhang Xuaning thought that Fang Miao was going to fight with Zhang Suiwai, or to be on guard, but she didn't expect Fang Miao to be disappointed after hearing this, and said in a tone of extreme regret, "Regardless of whether it is true or not, the second girl's sister is cautious. Even if she has a little bit of fame and fortune, she will not use all kinds of means to make trouble with others. I'm glad for nothing. If she is a powerful person, I will be able to wrap up my burden and leave, and if she doesn't get me down, the possibility of being cocooned and bound by herself is very high, so I can eat soft rice in the palace and eat safely. She is so cautious in her words and deeds, not up or down, but it is a bit like a fish in the throat, so I don't know what to do. I hope that there will be nothing to do with each other and that we will not hinder each other." Zhang Xuaning was silently speechless. In the last life, she married Shenju, in order to be the queen with great possibility, so she coaxed Shenju to be happy, and there was not even a side concubine in the house. Looking at it this way, she and Zhang Suiwai probably can't fight. After all, although Zhang Xuaning doesn't like Zhang Suiwai, she has to admit that the sister is very measured in her work, and rarely takes the initiative to have any conflicts with others. Although she does some things for her own benefit, she doesn't harm others. She sat at Fang Miao's place for a while, until Fang Miao's hands itched, and she felt out her pile of things, wanting to tell her fortune. She finally made an excuse and hurriedly said goodbye. If it was in her previous life, she would definitely not believe this thing. Now that people have been born again, they feel that there is something mysterious about the world. But the more this happened, the more she didn't dare to tell fortunes. If something is really criticized, and it is not a good ending, will the days go on? It's better to know nothing, chase what you want, and grab what you want to keep. Fang can be called happy. After leaving Fang's mansion like this, Zhang Xuaning continued to prepare for her own trip to Shizhong, and on the day of Shenju's wedding, she no longer went to visit Fang Miao alone, but stayed in Zhang Suiwai's room after sending her relatives all the way to the palace. The dragon and phoenix candles have a high fever, and the house is red. It's just that the house is much smaller than when Jiang Xuning got married, and the location is not the main house, and there are fewer maids and wives guarding the door, so they are not so enthusiastic and sincere if they come together to flatter and flatter. In the previous life, Jiang Xuning was Shenju's main concubine, and there was no side concubine who entered the door on the same day at that time, so there was no comparison in my heart. Now that I think that Jiang Xuiwei is Shenju's side concubine, no matter how pomp or fame, she has to be a head shorter than Fang Miao. If it were her who was sitting in this room today, I was afraid that she would not be able to bear it anyway, and she would have lifted her hijab and walked away. Jiang Xuiwei was very calm. Ever since the decree of marriage arrived at Jiang's mansion, she already knew what she was going to face next. Even if it is not so wishy-washy, you have to grit your teeth and go on, and you don't have much resentment towards others. Outdoor road. Jiang Xuiwei took off the red hijab and gently put it on the corner of the desk, as if she knew that Jiang Xuning had something to say to herself today, and didn't ask her why she stayed here at this time, just sat at the table, poured a cup of tea and put it opposite her. Jiang Xuning stood opposite her and looked at her. The difference between the concubines and the concubines is no different from the difference between the folk wives and concubines, and if there are heirs in the future, they will have to divide a concubine, which is now reflected in the etiquette of marriage, but also in the dress of the house, and even in Jiang Xuiwei's red wedding dress. The gold thread used is not as much as Fang Miao's, and the cuffs are not peonies, but peonies, and the peacock is about to fly, and it is difficult to dance like a phoenix after all. Jiang Xuiwei smiled lightly. Are you pitying me? Jiang Xuning did not deny that she had some pity. But in this life, she didn't rob Jiang Xuiwei of her marriage. It can be said that she went with the flow, so Jiang Xuiwei didn't have a particularly strong feeling about what she gained or lost. It's just a little embarrassing. I didn't plan to come this time when you got married. Jiang Xuning picked up the teacup and looked at it. There was a dark blue glazed orchid leaf on the edge, but it was Shenju's plain taste. This person is good at everything, but he is not suitable to be an emperor. If you avoid the strife of imperial power in this life, you should be able to have a good ending, right? She laughed inexplicably and put the teacup down again. It's just that no matter what, Wan Niang raised me to grow up. She is your biological mother, and she always looks forward to your good. Now that you are married, or married to a noble royal family like King Linzi, she should be the most happy. It makes sense that I should have come to see it for her. Congratulations. Jiang Xuiwei heard her mention Wanyang again, so she closed her eyes slightly and fell silent. Jiang Xuning is rarely peaceful. In the past, when she mentioned Wanyang, she was always unwilling, with a little self-pity and hatred, both jealous of Jiang Xuiwei and disdainful of her, in order to preserve her poor self-esteem. Now that he has decided to leave the capital, he has seen it lightly. Su is a change in two lives, and finally let her find something more important than these old things, right? She wants to save the princess. She should be looking ahead. In the past, I was indeed jealous of you and hated you. Wan Niang stole you and me. You used my identity, took advantage of my family affection, and enjoyed my wealth, but I was inferior to you in any place, clumsy, irritable. The more I wanted to do a good job, the more I couldn't do a good job, but let others look down on me. Jiang Xuning took out the jade bracelet from her sleeve. The living are gone, but the dead remain. I don't see much difference from Wanyang when she handed it over to her before she died. But in recent days, I've changed my mind. In the past, I couldn't see it clearly in the bureau, but now I have withdrawn it, only to find that you are so boring to live. My mother treats you well, but she also restricts you. The capital is full of beautiful women, and people dare not make mistakes compared to others. I thought, if I want to enjoy the glory and wealth, occupy that family status, but live such a boring life, to be such a cold person, I am afraid that I will be unwilling and unwilling. Today is Zhang Suiwai's big day, so she wears unusually delicate makeup. It's just a little thicker. Her eyebrows and eyes were covered with fat powder, and her beautiful outlines were drawn, but her real expressions were pressed under the makeup, showing a depressed and dull woodenness. Zhang Xuning gently placed the Hishan Qingyu bracelet on the table between the two. A bracelet, like a sharp line, separates the two. She said lightly, Wan Niang took my hand before leaving, and asked me to give you this bracelet. The day she left, I clutched the bracelet and cried for 2 or 3 nights. When I saw you in the capital, I thought, even if I die, this bracelet will not be given to you. But now I know that there are other people in the world besides Wan Niang. Even if Wan Niang hates me, there are still others who care about me and need me. The previous life can't be left to me, I admit it. She is not worthy of me, but I am worthy of her. Wan Niang's last wish in the previous life, she finally fulfilled it in this life. After speaking, Zhang Xuning didn't seem to have anything else to say. There was no more intersection between her and Zhang Suiwai, and she turned around and was about to leave. The room was quiet. Zhang Suiwai's gaze fell on the bracelet for a long time, and she slowly held it between her fingers, and her tentacles felt cold. I wanted to laugh, but I found tears in my eyes. She tugged at the corners of her lips, only to feel that the world was really ridiculous. Zhang Xuning hated her, was jealous of her, and embarrassed her, but in her position, how could she not be wrong? It's just a mistake. You don't have to argue about which is better and which is worse. There was a muffled bang. Zhang Xuaning's footsteps just arrived at the door, and when she heard it, she was shocked, and when she looked back, she saw that Zhang Suiwai picked up the best inkstone on the side and smashed it hard. The Hishan green jade bracelet suddenly fell apart. The broken jade lay in the corner of the table, silent. Zhang Suiwai didn't have an extra look on her face, wiped away the tears that slid down her cheeks a little numbly, threw down the square inkstone, and only said, everyone has their own life, and I am already such a person, so you don't have to expect anything from me. No matter how much she loves me, she is just a stranger to me who I have never met. Zhang Xuning looked at her with pity for a long time, but after all, she didn't say a word and went out. In the palace, the planning is staggered, and the guests are lively. In this world, it is often difficult to distinguish between right and wrong. Cute and hateful, but very direct. Zhang Suiwai doesn't know if she's right or not. Anyway, she doesn't hate this person, but she just can't like it. Chapter 173, It was appropriate. At the gate of the palace, the door is like a city. The guests handed over their invitations and gift lists, and the porter outside was overwhelmed, frequently singing loudly and inviting people in. When encountering a person in a position of authority, he tends to become more and more enthusiastic. Zhou Yanzi is also a role in Jinyue. But now that a gift slip is handed out, it is only in exchange for the ordinary faces of the people in the palace, and you can know how many princes and nobles have gathered here today. Was originally the daughter of the Zhang family, and Zhou Yanzi relied on Zhang Boyu's recommendation to get into the office, and he should have prepared a generous gift. But after thinking about it a while ago, I remembered that the relationship between Zhang Xuning and her sister didn't seem to be harmonious, so I reduced the original gift by half. It's just that the eldest princess and her relatives were in the same place. Zhang Xuning asked him to do something, and later said that he didn't need to. I've never heard of her walking around outside for a while. Originally, young Master Xie, who had met in the Tongzhou incident, seemed to have just an ordinary teacher-student relationship with her, and the Dingfei Shizi, who was rumored some time ago, was originally a fool, and the Xiao family from whom he was born was still crumbling. Zhou Yin's people stood at the gate of the palace, but they were really worried in their hearts. The saint now attaches more importance to the Jinyi guard, and the original governor in the guard has been promoted, and his original official position is just vacant. He has a heart for this, but he was only promoted to 1,000 households not long ago last year, and it seems that the position of this town envoy will not fall on his head. But if you want to miss this opportunity, wait for the next vacancy. Do you know how long it will be? Just thinking about it like this, a singing voice suddenly came from the street outside the door. Concubine Xian Niang has arrived. It was much quieter. A luxurious carriage stopped at the door, and Xiao Shu, who was dignified and exquisite, stepped on the back of the eunuch with the hands of the palace people and got off the car, glanced around, and only said lightly, "The two concubines on the front side of the palace and His Royal Highness the King of Lindsay are all classmates in the past, so I came to the banquet, and the Saint and the Queen Mother are still behind, so you don't have to be nervous." And all the people saluted her. It's just that I can't help muttering in my heart, the Xiao family is now in the whirlpool of the reinvestigation of the Ganzhou disaster relief silver case, and the left and right sides are staggering. This newly sealed virtuous concubine is very high profile. How can it seem that she is not affected at all? When she came, others naturally wanted to make way for her. Originally, Zhou Yinzi was at the door, and he had already handed over the post, and he was about to step into the door with one foot. Seeing Xiao Shu walking towards the side, he retracted his steps, took a few steps back, and bent down to salute as Xiao Shu approached. Xiao Shuyuan didn't look at anyone, but when she saw this, she couldn't help but glance at him. This time, he saw the brocade Wei Suandi flying fish suit worn by the other party, and his eyebrows were slightly raised. Recently, he has been serving by Shen Lang's side, and he also knows that he seems to have the idea of reusing the brocade guard, so he keeps an eye on it. She smiled faintly and said, "Thank you, sir." After speaking, he didn't stay long, and went straight inside. Zhou Yinzi was slightly surprised, frowned slightly, and thought about it, but there was some dark light flashing in his eyes. As soon as Xiao Shu left, the noise outside resumed. The servants of the house came to lure the guests in. The halls were already full of people. Those with a slight identity are arranged in the flower hall. Most of the officials in the court have arrived, and they were cautious and serious in the past, but today it is rare to put down the shelf, at least put aside the old grudges on the face, push the cup and change the lamp, and talk and laugh. The officials of the 6 ministries also sat close together and divided into 2 sides. The Ministry of Officials, the Ministry of Punishment, and the Ministry of Household are at one end, and the Ministry of Rights, the Ministry of Works, and the Ministry of War are next to them. Xie Wei Tongzhou took charge of the actual shortage of the Ministry of Works, and he happened not to be with Zhang Boyu. Zhang Boyu is a household servant, and he coincidentally sits very close to Zhang Sha. Not far from the side are Gu Chunfang, the Secretary of the Criminal Department, Yao Qingyu, the Secretary of the Ministry of Officials, Chen Ying, the waiter of the Criminal Department, and others. Because today it is also Zhang Boyu's daughter, everyone congratulated him. Zhang Boyu drank a few cups and waved his hand again and again, and said with a wry smile, "But there is not much to be happy about. The eldest daughter is obedient and sensible, and the second daughter is like a demon king in the world, but it is tricky." That's true. Everyone has heard some rumors, but it's not easy to say it. Anyway, Zhang Xuning was praised all the time, and persuaded him to drink as usual. Ling Aihua looks like the moon, and was once the princess's companion. She must be a good lady. How can you believe the gossip outside? Chen Ying echoed, "Yes, I knew it was fake as soon as I heard it." Others wondered, why is that? Now that Gu Chunfang is in charge of the criminal department, Chen Ying is used to using some selfish means, but Gu Chunfang dislikes it, and he doesn't know what he has in mind, so he actually glanced at Zhang Sha, and said with a smile, "I don't know Lord Jiang's love for his daughter, but isn't the other one sitting in front of us in the rumors that spread on the streets and alleys a while ago? Do you think our Lord Zhang is like this, like someone who will be involved with some woman? Everyone was stunned, their eyes turned to Zhang Sha, and they reacted. Not to mention, really. This newly promoted criminal commander has been sitting here for a while, but he is silent and barely says a word, so that everyone subconsciously ignores him. At this time, Chen Ying mentioned it, and suddenly realized. Isn't it? Wasn't there a cover in those rumors a while ago? Dressed in an ordinary way, wearing a dark blue robe, an ordinary black jade decorated with a black silver pattern bag hanging from his waist, sitting with his back straight, and a silent cold carving on his face, which makes people feel unapproachable. The Emperor Xie Wei is recognized by the DPRK and China as a spring breeze. But he, the criminal department, privately calls it a dead man's face. Even the chief bookkeepers in the Yamen had to shake when they saw him, and added 2 more pieces of clothes. Who could believe that such a person had anything to do with which girl's family, or which girl's family didn't have long eyes but took a fancy to him? Since that day when the Shuxiangin was chased up and questioned, Zhang Sha has never seen Zhang Xuning again, and subconsciously avoided thinking of him again, and only used files and cases to bury himself all day long, only fearing that one day he would be free. He couldn't control the delusions that made him painful in his head. Hearing the name suddenly at the moment was like a hammer hitting the chest. He had a cold expression, and the fluctuations were not obvious, but the fingers on the edge of the wine cup tightened. It's just that this subtle movement is difficult for others to notice. Zhang Boyu had little dealings with the criminal department in the past, and the gossip spread very chaotically for a while, and he paid more attention to the ridiculous Ding Fei Shizi, lest this person have anything to do with Ning Yedu, so he didn't care much about Zhang Sha. After all, I heard that this person has a noble character, and he is not that kind of person. Thinking that it was someone else who poured dirty water on Ning Yedu, after all, he had never seen the children of princes and nobles circling around his daughter, and he had never heard of Ning Yedu taking the initiative to entangle anyone. That rumor was just nonsense. But now, because of Chen Ying's words, he raised his head and took a look. Gu Chunfang knew that Zhang Sha was not good at words, and he didn't like Chen Ying's trouble-provoking style, so she stroked her beard and smiled, and said lightly, "Gossip hurts people. Lord Zhang teaches her daughter well. Both girls are selected as princess companions. I heard that the second girl Zhang is even very grateful to the young master. Xiao Xiao, who secretly spreads rumors, can only damage his reputation for a while, and after a long time, the rumors will be broken, and Lord Zhang doesn't have to worry. It's okay not to mention Xie Wei, but it's not good to mention Zhang Boyu. It's just that it was Gu Chunfang who said this. One was out of good intentions, and the other was ignorant of the inside story. He couldn't say anything, so he smiled reluctantly and diverted the topic. I borrowed Lord Gu's auspicious words. Speaking of which, Xiao Zhang Langzhong also has 24 or 5, and it seems that he hasn't talked about marriage yet. This time, it was the turn of Yao Qingyu, the secretary of the Ministry of Officials, and his face was not very good. Who told him that his daughter had a relationship with Zhang Sha? Originally, he admired Zhang Sha and wanted to marry Yao Zixu to him. Who would have thought that his daughter would not look down on him, and he would withdraw from his relatives? Later, because she pushed Wen Ziyi in the palace, she almost caused Wen Ziyi to have a miscarriage and was reprimanded to return home. It would be disgraceful to say this. Zhang Sha sat precariously and replied with lowered eyes, "One is stubborn, and the other is bitter and hard, and I dare not burden others." Zhang Boyu couldn't help but be stunned. Yao Qingyu glanced at Zhang Sha, his face was a little pale, and he only sighed that Zhang Sha didn't mention the previous resignation, which shows that his character is valuable. But the more I know this, the more I feel that my daughter is really blind. He sighed and said, "What a fate, nonsense." Everyone has heard more or less about Zhang Sha and Yao Fu's family affair, and they thought that there must be some discord between Yao Qingyu and Zhang Sha, but they didn't expect Zhang Sha to claim that he was hard-working. Yao Teifu's identity actually refuted him, his face was reprimanded, and he pondered inside, but he was speaking for Zhang Sha. Why did he quit his family? No one outside knows. Zhang Boyu is also a little bit of an official in the court, and when he heard this, he was really a little curious about Zhang Sha. As an auxiliary minister of the cabinet, Yao Teifu has a good vision. It is already good to be selected as a son-in-law by him, and it is rare that if things don't work out, he can still let Mrs. Yao speak for him. Zhang Sha is a rare civil official born in the imperial examination, which is not much more glorious than the officials who were admitted to the imperial examination in the Manchu dynasty. Can be silent and prudent. Compared with those gentlemen in Beijing, I really don't know how much better. Although it doesn't seem to be very easy to get along with, there is no anger on his body, and his heart should be very good. It looks like she can bluff Ning Yetu, and she won't treat the girl's family lightly. Zhang Boyu's mind moved slightly, so he inquired casually, I only heard that Xiao Zhonglang's Hong's ancestral home is in Henan, and the reason why he voted under Master Gu back then was to avenge his father. It seems that it hasn't been a few years since you came to the capital. Zhang Sha said, yes, but only 3 years. Zhang Boyu said, oh, are you used to living? Zhang Sha's fingers clutching the cup tighter, but he closed his eyes and replied as usual, the phonology is similar, and there is no discomfort. Zhang Boyu said again, then Lingtang's body is still healthy. Gu Chunfang, an old fox, finally heard a little eyebrows, and couldn't help but glance at Zhang Boyu, and then turned his head to look at Zhang Sha. But as soon as his eyes fell, he saw his tight fingers holding the cup, and then looked at the silent outline, and couldn't help but feel a little strange for a while. This protégé. It doesn't seem to be so calm on the surface, but as if it's enduring some kind of suffering. Here, Zhang Boyu chatted with people, and the more he looked at it, the more he felt that Zhang Sha was very suitable. Over there, Xie Wei sat with the others, listening to the words of Zhang Boyu, Gu Chunfang, Zhang Sha and others behind him, but he secretly sneered, his eyes were full of anger, and his face was still indistinguishable, and he only drank the wine in the cup, burning to the heart. Chapter 174, Tips. Shenju is the younger brother of the same mother as the current Emperor Shenlang, who has been favored by the saints, and the palace is also built very luxuriously, covering an extremely wide area. If the new guests do not have a maid to guide them, they will not be able to walk long in the garden, and they will be lost. But Zhang Xuning is very familiar. Who told her that she had lived in this mansion for more than 2 years in her previous life. Coming out of Zhang Suiwai's side courtyard, she didn't want to go back to the women's banquet, so she didn't bother to deal with it, so she walked along the corridor next to the small lake in the garden, wanting to find a quiet place to hide for a while, and then go out when the banquet was about to disperse. Unexpectedly, I turned around the corridor and met Shenju. The groom who got married today is wearing a red wedding dress, and his face is more and more lined like a crown of jade, and his temperament is warm. There are also a group of attendants behind him, which makes people feel that's Hilan Yushu, the stars, and the moon. Looking at the direction, he is coming from the main house Fangmiao, and he wants to go to Zhang Suiwai's side. This one took a look, and both of them were a little surprised. Shenju was stunned, reacted first, and bowed his hand first. The second girl is polite. Zhang Xuning was in a trance. The other party's dress is the same as in his previous life. But when she saw it, it was not in the daylight outside, but in the new house. I don't know if I drank too much wine or was thin-skinned, when His Royal Highness held a joyful title and lifted her hijab, her handsome face was faintly red under the red candle. At that time, she also had a slight dizziness, but the tenderness and sweetness were all illusions, because she was ruthless to this person, so beyond the illusion, what spread in her heart was the boundless emptiness. She returned the salute and said, "His Royal Highness the King of Linz's mansion is too big. I originally just wanted to take a shortcut and go back to the banquet, but I didn't expect to get lost after only 2 steps." The same is true for Shen Yuchai. After Jiang Xuning finished speaking, she stared at him for a moment, and suddenly asked the attendant next to her, "Is there any wine?" Those people were stunned for a moment, and subconsciously looked at Shenju. Shenju didn't know what Jiang Xuning meant. Jiang Xuning smiled and explained, "Although I am not familiar with His Highness, I have been taken care of by His Highness in the palace." His Royal Highness and Yan Lin were old friends, and now that he was exiled to Huangzhou, he was afraid that he would not be able to come to congratulate him in person. "Whether it is in love or reason, I should be for myself and for Yan Lin, and I will give His Highness a cup, and His Highness will be very happy." Only then did Shenju understand. Just mentioning Yan Lin, he couldn't help but be a little gloomy, and only asked someone to go and get the wine first, but said, "It was a good day for great joy, but now Yan Lin is not here, and Zai Ai is not there." With Jiang Xuning, he doesn't have a deep relationship. Outsiders all say that this second girl Jiang is arrogant, but she has probably heard too much Yan Lin's nagging, and she knows that the emperor's sister Shen Zai Ai treats her very much, and Shenju does not have the same general opinion as ordinary people. The first to entertain guests in the front hall, everyone said that he married the 2 concubines at the same time today, and he enjoyed the blessings of all people. He thanked him on his face, but he was not so happy in his heart. But judging from the eyes of others, he has no reason to be unhappy. At the moment, Jiang Xuning mentioned this, which was not a pleasant topic, but Shenju suddenly felt relaxed, as if he suddenly had a justifiable reason to be unhappy. There is a water pavilion nearby. Today, the house is very happy, and drinks are prepared for guests everywhere. The servant quickly retrieved the drink and poured one for each of them. Jiang Xuning picked up a lamp, but what came to mind was all kinds of things that Shenju took her in the previous life, celebrating her birthday, being crowned a queen, and even leaving the jade seal of the country for her to keep when she was dying, although this thing later became the disaster of her self-inflicted burial, but as an emperor, he treated her who was ruthless to him, which was really impeccable. It's just that if the heart is too good, the good will be cowardly. She raised her glass to him and said slowly and seriously, "Your Highness is a good person, Xuaning's cup, I wish you all the best in this life. All wishes can be fulfilled, and peace and smoothness will be granted." It's really an ordinary greeting, and even on his wedding day, it has a weird and untimely taste. Shenju frowned slightly and looked at her. She smiled flatly, there was no calculation in her clear eyes, but sincerity, like a thin stream of veins flowing through people's hearts, making people gradually feel ironed. The cup stretched out, touched him lightly, and looked up to drink it first. Shenju blinked, but felt a moment of confusion. What did the girl put down in front of her? It was as if she was relieved. He couldn't understand it, but he was also bent and smiled with her relaxed attitude, and only said, "I am willing to borrow auspicious words," and he also raised his head and drank it all. In the previous life, she was ruthless to Shenju, but Shenju was benevolent and righteous to him. In this life, she avoided the intersection with Shenju, not only gave herself a freedom, but also hoped that without her own drag, the other party could get a good reward. Jiang Xuning put the cup down and said goodbye again. The gesture of turning away can be called relieved and chic. Shenju stood in place and looked at it for a long time, but for some reason he was stunned. It wasn't until the attendant reminded him that he lowered his eyes to look at the wine cup in his hand, put it back in the attendant's hand, and continued to walk towards the courtyard where Jiang Suiwai was. Asterisk. Jiang Xuning met Shenju on the road, and said that he didn't know the road, and of course he was not afraid of finding a place to be lazy, and he encountered a quiet boat on the edge of the small lake in front of him, so he sat on the side, combing what he wanted to do after going to Shuzhong, while waiting for the sun to go down. The front hall was really lively for a while. Listening to the sound of "Long Live" from a distance, I knew that the emperor and the queen had come, and it didn't take long to hear a piece of congratulations, so I knew that the emperor was gone again. When it was about to get dark, she expected that the hour was about the same, so she got up again and walked towards the antechamber. At this time, some guests who were on official business had already taken their leave. Zhang Xuening asked Zhang Boyo from the mouth of the attendant that Zhang Boyo was in the pavilion in the east corner of the garden, so he looked for a way to find it. Sure enough, from a distance, I saw Zhang Boyo standing facing outward, talking to several people, and one of them was standing with his back outward. It was dark and the light was dim. She didn't see clearly for a while, but when she got closer, the man's voice came into her ears, and the figure turned slightly sideways before she could recognize it at once. At this moment, there was really a feeling of looking back and the lights were dim, and a faint blazing heat rolled over my heart, leaving behind a burn that could not be erased. On the day of the Shuxiang Inn, the words had already been spoken, although Zhang Xuening felt that she was not a stalker, but she was afraid of embarrassment when she met. When they recognized him, their footsteps stopped not far or near. Zhang Boyo had good eyes, but he saw her. But after talking to everyone for a while, they said goodbye to each other. Zhang Sha didn't know that she was behind her, but when he turned around, he saw her standing under the begonia tree, and his figure froze. But he didn't speak. Zhang Xuening didn't say anything. Until Zhang Boyo came over and said with a smile, "Why are you looking for me?" Zhang Xuening blinked, retracted her gaze, and said, "I just remembered some matters in Shuzhong, and I felt that I had to talk to my father." Zhang Boyo looked around, as if he was taboo about something, and waved his hand and said, "It just so happens that I also have some ideas about your family affairs. I want to talk to you, and I will talk about it on the way back. I'll go and say goodbye to a few other colleagues first, and you will wait for me here for a moment." Zhang Xuening didn't know what he was thinking, but she didn't ask deeply. Just nodded and watched him go. When she turned around and went to look for Zhang Sha, the place where he had stopped was empty. In the previous life, there was no fate. In this life, there is no fate. She chuckled and secretly scolded God for tossing her, only to feel that she was afraid that it would take a while to come out. After standing for a while, I felt tired again, so I simply walked to the pavilion. It's just that when he went up the steps and passed by the clump of Nantian bamboo next to him, Zhang Xuening looked at it wrongly, but suddenly saw a black silver-veined brocade hanging between the reddish leaves in early summer, like someone who was accidentally hung up when he passed by this overgrown branch. She picked it up casually, not paying attention. However, the moment I got it in my hands, I felt familiar. In the previous life, Zhang Sha didn't often hang such a bag around him. Once she wondered which girl gave it to her, so she snatched it to play. I thought that Zhang Sha had lost his temper by his own toss, but he suddenly changed his face. Although he was still stoic and silent, he was a little more angry when he frowned. She couldn't stand it and returned it. Later, I learned that it was a loving mother's heart of love for her son, stitches and threads, although it did not contain anything important, but it was of great significance to Zhang Sha. If she had found this thing in her previous life, she would have used it to laugh and satirize, but now she saw it, her eyes were full of sourness, and she thought that if he found that something was lost, he would be very worried, so he planned to hand it over to the people of the palace for safekeeping, and prepared for him to return to find it. But as soon as he moved, there was a sound of small objects colliding in the bag. Zhang Xuening suddenly froze, her fingers trembling. Lowering his eyes and staring at the bag in his hand, some complicated thoughts crossed his mind, but it was like a vast white mist, leaving no traces. It took a long time to stand up, a long time, before she slowly untied the bag. Crash. Dozens of gold and silver bills that were auspicious for the new year rolled down and scattered in her palms. Along with the falling out, there is also half a page of tissue paper folded up, and the ink stains on the back can be faintly seen. Zhang Xuaning's tears fell in an instant. She pressed hard against her atrium, but she felt like she was drowning, and the next moment she couldn't breathe. The anxiety of hanging the bag outside his door that night, and the loneliness of standing in front of him that day and asking him what he wanted, all passed through his heart, but this moment turned into an incomprehensible absurdity, an indignant sorrow. Zhang Sha, I belong to you. Second Miss Zhang forgives, she already has someone she wants in her heart. If you really care about others and don't care about me, then what's the point of keeping these things? Chapter 175, The Minister's Confession. Zhang Sha found something missing halfway through. It's just that since he bumped into Zhang Xuaning, he didn't feel like he belonged, and he couldn't tell when he started to disappear, and whether he was lost on the way back, or in the Linzi Palace. So he went and returned. Zhang Xuaning was no longer in the empty garden, and the pavilion was empty, only the messy cups and plates left by the two attendants in the pavilion. Seeing that Zhang was gone and returned, the attendant who had been waiting before had some impression of him, stepped forward and bowed, and took the initiative to ask, Master Zhang, what's wrong, but what has fallen behind? Zhang Sha asked, have you ever seen a bag? The attendant was stunned for a moment. Is it the appearance of the silver veins on the bottom of the suandi? Zhang Sha said, have you seen it? The attendant waved his hand again and again, but his eyes became a little strange, and his expression was also a little difficult, and he hesitated for a moment before he said, I saw that it was a thing, but when I came here to clean up, I saw that the daughter of Zhang Shilang's family was standing here, holding a bag, which is somewhat similar to what you are looking for. She looked at the little ones didn't dare to go up and ask more. Zhang Sha stood in front of the steps, in a trance. The waist is missing the bag, and it is a little empty. The attendant then felt that the expression of the young court official in front of him overlapped for a moment with the second girl Zhang he had seen before, a strange and swaying heaviness, like a mirror under the dark water, making the refracted light look dim. It was a long time before Zhang Sha spoke. He asked, is Miss Zhang gone? The attendant nodded and said, yes, it seems that I have already returned to the house with Lord Zhang. Zhang Sha closed his eyes slightly, was silent for a moment, and then said thank you. The attendant was puzzled, but he did not dare to ask more. When I bowed down again, I looked up and saw the adult walking out along the garden path, clearly warm and intoxicating summer night. When the back gradually disappeared at the end of the light under the cascading corridor, it seemed to be walking in the cold autumn frost. The day before yesterday, there was a rain, which washed away the floating dust that shrouded the capital, and the pavement of the long street was also washed clean by the rain. The sound of cars and horses died down. Then the sound of footsteps on the road became obvious, empty, and deserted. Zhang Sha seemed to think about everything in his mind, and he didn't seem to think about anything. The place where he lived was quite a distance from the mansions of the princes and nobles, and after this place where every inch of land was valuable, the height of the pavilions on both sides was lowered, and gradually some laughter and shouting sounded. This morning, he accidentally knocked over the teapot at home, and his mother told him to remember to buy a new one when he came back. Zhang Sha entered the porcelain shop that closed late, and chose a simple set of white porcelain tea sets from Xinjiao, but listened to the shopkeeper of the porcelain shop sigh as he accompanied a yak standing in front of Duo Baoj. King wine, drunken hometown wine, the glaze is bright and thin, and it is called the thin bone of plum. It's a pity that Boss Joe's plum bottle is broken, and I have found many skilled craftsmen to repair it, but I can only stop there. From a distance, it's like a new bottle. You can't get close. If you look at this neck, the seams are subtle, and it is difficult for a skilled craftsman to fill in the old marks. After all, it is broken, your cherished love, and you will have to take care of it more carefully in the future, otherwise a little bump will have to fall apart, and it cannot be compared with bridging as new, just out of the kiln when it is integrated. Alas. Zhang Xia looked at that grid. A foot-high plum bottle stood in the middle, azure as jade, delicate fetal quality, and natural beauty. But there are tiny cracks on it, which are left after repair, like scars that have been worn away by time but are always difficult to erase. The guy in front of the counter glanced at him. Does child also want to buy a plum bottle? Zhang Shike slowly retracted his gaze and said, no need. The money was paid, and the tea set was brought home. Zhang's mother knew that he was going to the banquet today, and she was afraid that he would inevitably have a banquet and drink too much wine, so she prepared a decanting soup and heated it, and when she saw him coming back, she just served it to him. Zhang covered his heart for a while. For a moment, he even felt all kinds of depression, but in the end, he still lowered his voice and said to Zhang, it's too late to come back, and my mother is worried about it. You don't have good bones, so you might as well go to bed early. How can it be said that he is also the son raised by himself? How can the Zhang family not see that he is preoccupied? For several days in a row, he has been going out early and returning late, and he has not finished his official business in the Yamen, and it is just a matter of saying that there are indeed many complicated things, but looking at his appearance, it seems that he does not want to think about anything except official business, but it is more like using this to suppress something. But he has a lot of ideas since he was a child, and he buries everything in his heart. Zhang didn't know much about his affairs, and now that he looked like he had nothing to do, he knew that he wouldn't say anything if he asked, so he simply didn't ask, and only said, even if your father didn't have any interest in you back then, he will definitely be blind if he has knowledge. My mother just hopes that you will be calmer, and it would be good to meet a girl you like and start a family. As for glory and wealth, although it is good, you have to chase it, but you have to chase it, but you are very tired of yourself. Zhang Xia did not explain. Zhang sighed, and withdrew from this ordinary study, telling him to go to bed early, and then close the door. He brought back many files from the criminal department to read them. Now it's all stacked high on the desk. The flame of the lamp on the side swayed gently, lying on the paper according to the lines of ink, but it could not enter the bottom of the eye. Zhang Xia felt that the light was dazzling, so he moved the lamp farther away. And then the words on the paper were darkened. He sat behind the desk, like the ink on the inkstone on the desk, which was gradually drying up, and he didn't move for a night. The early summer light comes early. The voices in the market were noisy again. Zhang woke up early in the morning and cooked porridge, thinking that Zhang Xia had already gone to court before dawn as usual, so he planned to clean up the room and tidy up the courtyard before the weather got hot. Who would have thought that he would be in front of the door of his bedroom, so he put his hand on it, and the door opened. The bed was neatly made and pillowed, and it was clear that no one had slept last night. When I turned my head again, the door of the study was closed. It was not yet dawn, and there was still a little light coming through it. She hesitated, then knocked lightly in front of the door. Aren't you going to the court today? Zhang Xia's body sitting behind the desk moved slightly, as if he had finally been pulled back from some dark and lonely place, but he said slowly, I won't go today. He never delayed the day when the court called for a big upsurge. Yesterday did not say that today is a day off. Zhang Xi was stunned for a long time, and then said, then I'll go to the market to buy some vegetables, and then go to the yamen after breakfast. She packed her things and went out, carrying a small bamboo basket. The morning market is the time to live. Pick a 2-pound black carp, buy some tender ginger, chives, leeks, and fresh tofu, and finally choose a piece of pork shoulder meat that looks good, put it in a bamboo basket, and go home. When I went to the market, it was still dark. When I returned, the morning light was already dim. It's just that when Zhang turned around the familiar alley and saw the old courtyard of his house, he suddenly found that there was a young girl standing under the mossy steps. Wearing a moon-white wide-sleeved fairy dress, her face was facing the sky, her complexion looked pale in the morning light, she raised her head slightly, and seemed to be a little sluggish looking at the mottled wooden door. It's early in the morning. Zhang hesitated, walked over, and asked with a smile, "This girl, are you looking for someone?" Zhang Xuning turned around and realized that she had stood for a long time. She saw Zhang, an ordinary-looking woman, who had gone through the wind and frost of raising her son alone, which left deeper marks on her face than that of women of the same age, with frosty white temples and fine wrinkles. In the bamboo basket in the crooked arm is the fresh vegetables that have just been bought. At this time, he looked at himself with a little worry, but his eyebrows were very kind. He should hate himself. There is only one family in the depths of this alley. Zhang Xuning has already guessed the identity of this woman, and the guilt in her heart is surging like a hot spring, barely laughing, but tears are still falling. She said, "Excuse me, is this the family of Master Zhang of the criminal department?" But he had come to find his son of wood. Zhang Shi saw such a fairy-like and glamorous girl, and she didn't think about Zhang Sha at all. It can be seen that she shed tears before she said a word, and remembered Zhang Sha's unusual things last night and this morning, and muttered in his heart for a while, "That kid Elm Pimple can't move, don't provoke other girls and make people sad, right? When I was in Henan, I was fine, but I didn't learn well in the capital. If he really does something lacking in morality, see that she doesn't ask for family law, and beat him up for his short-lived father." Yes, here it is. Zhang Shi couldn't help but be in a hurry, and hurriedly said, "He didn't go to court today, he is in the study, you can please come in first, and I will call him for you." She stepped forward and opened the door and asked Zhang Xuning to enter. Then he forgot to put down the bamboo basket he was carrying, and he was going to knock on the door of the study that had not been opened that night and let Zhang cover it out. Before she could walk up the steps, the door that had been closed opened unexpectedly. Zhang covered his hand and stood in the door. Mo Ian's robe hung on him, although it was still straight, it gave people a sense of silence. He quietly looked at Zhang Xuning standing in this humble courtyard, and after a long time, he said, "Second Miss Zhang, please come in." Zhang Xuning also looked at him for a long time before walking up the steps. When he arrived at the door, Zhang Sha gave way in. She entered the house. Zhang Shike explained to Zhang Shi, turned around and closed the door. Two people who hadn't slept all night sat down facing each other. The tea was aged last night and was already cold. On the bookcase full of files, a wisp of green smoke floated at the end of the wick of the lamp, which had burned out. The rising sun shone obliquely from the east on the low lacquer table in front of the window, dispelling a bit of cold. Zhang Xuning stared at him. Zhang Sha lowered his gaze. She said softly, "Today should be the morning, but Lord Zhang is at home, as if he knows that I will come, is he waiting for me?" Zhang Sha was silent. Zhang Xuning folded her hands on her kneeling laps, was calm, and laughed. "I once confessed that I belonged to Lord Zhang, but Lord Zhang said that I already belonged to my heart. That day, I was in a trance, and I didn't admit defeat at all, so I forgot to ask. I don't know who this girl is that adults like." The palm under Zhang Sha's case was quietly clenched. He said, "People in the capital are just ordinary people. Zhang Sha can also lie, and he will also deceive people." Zhang Xuning blinked, and asked again. Soon after Zhang Dake and Miss Yao divorced, he empathized with this person. Although he is an ordinary family, he should not be bad in appearance, and his temperament is also above me, right? Zhang covered it for a while before saying, "Second Miss Zhang is impeccable, but she is from a humble background, and she doesn't dare to mistake the girl for life. Her talent and appearance cannot be compared with that of a girl, and her temperament is not very good, but she. Zhang Xuning asked, just what? Zhang Sha finally raised his eyes to look at her, restrained and patient, but his heart was extremely desolate, staring at her pupils, as if he wanted to say that this face was engraved into his heart, and said slowly, it's just that I love her. Zhang Xuning burst out laughing, then what's her name? Zhang Sha was speechless. Zhang Xuning suddenly hated him, and couldn't even hang up that little fake smile. He only put the bag that had been hidden in his sleeve for a long time and had been reading it all night on the table, and the thin page was unfolded and pressed on the bag, and said, Lord Zhang can't say it, I'll tell you, okay. Zhang Sha closed his eyes. Zhang Xuning said word by word, almost ruthlessly, and said to him with red eyes, the person you like is not as good looking, so bad, not a good person, her surname is Zhang, her name is Zhang Xuning. I intend to turn my heart to the bright moon. On that page, the ink blot, which is rare to be correct, has penetrated, but it is not old. But Zhang Sha's heart is full of holes. Zhang Xuning stubbornly asked, how can you say that you don't like me, how dare you say you don't like me? Zhang Sha then remembered his previous life. She is fresh, she is bright, she is flamboyant, and she is wanton. At that time, he couldn't restrain that arrogant heart and wanted to get close to her. Can be finally. The jade mountain is tilted, and the brocade screen is broken. The heart in his chest seemed to have been cut out by her sharp words, and the blood was drenched on the tip of the knife, and 1,000 kinds of bitterness poured into his throat, and fell back again, full of sour and astringent. The plum bottle has been broken in the end. He looked at her, as if he had looked at her from his previous life to this life, and finally called her in a low voice, Niang Niang. Empress. The person in front of him, how could he call her Niang Niang? Zhang Xuning first felt a kind of confusion, and then swayed dizzy. The faint words of the voice passed from her ears to her heart. The shade in front of him swayed gently, and the sunlight shining in was pale, and there seemed to be a fog rising in the room, making everything around him blurry and even rumbling. She subconsciously shook her head. How so? I must have heard it wrong. But there was a voice in his heart that was smiling coldly, I know, you should have known. You have only known each other for a long time in this life, why does he have a deep affection for you, and he likes you but still hides it from you? You heard you right? A heartache, coupled with endless guilt, bound her and made her sit down. At this moment, everything is understood. It was as if there was a high mountain, a sinking abyss, crushing her, letting her fall, she couldn't bear it, buried her head to cover her face, and wept uncontrollably. Zhang Sha walked over without a word, only to feel like the cruel executioner, breaking her last line of defense. The convergence of past and present lives is like a torrent. He half knelt beside her, his Adam's apple rolled slightly, and finally allowed himself to trespass at this moment, gently hugged her into his arms, and said, it's not good to be a minister, it's not good to be a minister. She cried, you didn't tell me a long time ago, you lied to me. Zhang Sha said, it was the minister who deceived you. Zhang Xuning hated herself, recalling her previous questioning, and only felt that she was ridiculous. Where is she worthy? Her tears fell on Zhang Sha's chest, wetting the placket of his clothes, soaking his heart in it, and making him confirm that he really shouldn't tell her, Niang Niang, the minister is also afraid. I'm afraid you know that the one in front of you is Zhang Sha from the previous life. Once known, the past will come back one after another, giving birth to endless guilt. She wants to be free, she wants to get what she wants. But this guilt is enough to crush and knock down a person who has gradually left the past. All the people she met were new, but he was her old bond. And the chasm that has been torn apart by the too heavy past, Even if both of them want to try their best to fill it, how can it be bridged? How tiring should you be to live like that? When she was in front of him, she didn't look like the real her at all.